So, dear colleagues, we now enter in the final group of presentations for today, and I will ask our first presenter, Professor Dr. Marion Röwekamp from the College of Mexico, from the Humboldt Professor at the College of Mexico, to take the floor to speak about When Women Rule, Female Parliamentarians in the Weimar Republic, 1918 to 1933.
Okay, now I see you. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, great. So let me open my PowerPoint and see whether I can share it. So, well, I'm just getting confused on my computer, I'm sorry.
No problem. Hello from us here.
Hello, Nina. How are you doing? I'm not finding the file. Here I am.
Okay.
So let me see how I do it here. So do you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Then still looking for the entire. So now it should be fine, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Then we're set. So thank you very much, Nina, for the invitation. It is a great pleasure to be like only virtually in Belgrade, but again in a event with you. I'm going to talk today about the topic When Women Rule, Female Parliamentarians in the Weimar Republic. Gentlemen and ladies, this is the first time in Germany that women can speak to the people and free and equal in parliament. What this government has done has been a matter of course. It has given women what they have been wrongfully been deprived of. With these words, the Social Democrat Marie Juchatz was the first woman ever to open a speech in the National Assembly on February 19th, 1999. Her words were met with laughter. Not laughter of being like laughing her out, as we say in Germany, or laughing about someone, but it was probably more a surprise by for the male parliamentarians that not only for the first time a woman spoke in the holy space, but she also greeted women and men. And she turned the usual formally ladies and gentlemen around and greeted them as ladies and gentlemen. With this, the female socialists like to allude to the existing imbalance among the sexes in Germany. 1 month earlier, on January 19th, 1919, women had voted for the first time. The decision for women's suffrage, for which women had been fighting for more than half a century, had been made by the Council of People Representatives, the Social Democratic Transitional Government, a few months earlier in November 1918. Voter turnout was high at 83%. Logically, because after the lost war, the revolution, and the proclamation of Germany's first democracy, a lot was at stake. The parties and the women's associations made a fast-track effort to educate women in their new citizenship rights. The women's associations, because they felt that the training was indispensable for them to perform the duties well. Here on the slide, you see 2 posters. On the right side, one of the women's organization asking women to vote. The left-wing liberals of the DDP, the Liberal Party, trained by women like Gertrud Bäumer and Helene Lange, both longtime leaders in the women's movement, convinced liberals, invited them to suffrage courses. The brochure Women Lernt wählen, also Frauen lernt wählen, Women learn to vote, found countless readers in this time. And the social democratic politician Edward Steeds stated, I'm citing him, women are currently at the center of political interest and all parties from the left to the right are making the most lively efforts to attract them. Gertrud Bäumer, whom I just mentioned and who's down on the right side, who not only went to the polls for the first time herself, but was also elected to the National Constituent Assembly, described the day of election, which you see on the right side in the above, that only women voting there. It is election day, the first ballot of women, the goal of a century, the beginning of a millennium. Thus, filled not with ourselves, but with all what we serve, we are pushed across the threshold, almost unconscious of what it means. It is beautiful, and how natural. This parade of families at the polling station, father and mothers and daughters. The little children run along. They want to see how their mothers vote. And the mother says they should think about this for all their lives. In the first parliament, 37 women were elected as members of parliament. 4 followed in a backup procedure. These were more women than in every other European state which had granted women suffrage yet, 9.7%. The same percentage of women that the German parliament only received again in 1983, when the Green Party first gained representation. 9.7% of women in parliament. One would think that this would have to lead to a radical expansion of women's political power in parliament. With active suffrage, they could co-determine their parliament and thus influence parliamentary decisions. With passive suffrage, these 9.7% of women could introduce bills, co-determine distribution of money, co-determine political discourse and culture, and generally significantly increase women's public representation. But what was the reality? Was it power redistributed? Were women able to rule? And if though, how did they rule? I will approach my topic from 3 points of view today. First, I will ask who was elected, were women really equally elected? And finally, how did women rule during the Weimar period? This talk today is especially based on the work of my colleague and friend Barbara von Hindenburg and the historian Kirsten Heinzson. Barbara actually also is a historian. So I'm coming to my first point, who was voted? Before 1918, women had been less involved in political parties, although this did not apply to the Social Democrats. The low level of involvement was a consequence of the ban on women's political activity that applied in Prussia and Bavaria until 1908. The hesitant opening of the parties to women thereafter was also a reason. Women parliamentarians from the left liberal German Democratic Party had previously been active in the Progressive People's Party, but the focal points of the political activity was usually the Bourgeois Women's Association and the National Councils of German Women, as in the case of Gertrud Bäumer, whom you have seen on the slide before. Center parliamentarians came in the majority from the Catholic women's movement, such as the chairman of the Catholic Women's League, Hedwig Dransfeld or Lene Weber. Here you see the members of the Catholic Center Party on the right on the slide. And Dransfeld and Weber are also in the picture. On the left side, you see the women of the Social Democratic Parliament. The origins of the female German national deputies was more heterogeneous. They were supporters as well as opponents on women's suffrage, those who were involved in trade unions and those who were active in Protestant, conservative or nationalist women's associations. Female parliamentarians from the parties of the left were more closely associated with their party from the beginning. Before 1908, they, such as Marie Juchatz or Elisabeth Röhl, were active in DECO organizations. They were called like women's education associations in order to be associated at all without having a political relation, which subsequently became part of the Social Democratic Party after 1908. Here they were particularly active on behalf of children, young people, and women workers. Some of the female communists in the Reichstag is a German parliament at that time, such as Martha Ahrensee and Clara Zetkin, also came from this tradition. Many women parliamentarians were born in the 1870s and 1880s. This generation of women had especially taken advantage of the new educational and professional path for women, and at the same time had worked for themselves. In their associations, unions, and parties, they had campaigned for the expansion of their right and fought for better social conditions in the municipalities and regions. In the municipalities, they already had practiced politics, demanded participation, and had been appointed to municipal bodies, for example. In these areas, they brought a high level of competence into the parliament. I'm coming to the next point. How was voted and did women achieve equal opportunities in the election ways? The pacifist and feminist leader Gustava Heimann, whom you see on the right side here, complained about the decrepit old man who already sat in the blessedly departed Reichstag and now, as unbelievable as it might seem, have been re-elected by German men and unfortunately also by German women. She was clearly unhappy with the results of this election. Although a relatively large number of women was elected, the parties had supported women and their causes were not rewarded. Although most women parliamentarians, as you have seen in the slide before, 19 in total, sat for the Social Democrats in the National Assembly, the Social Democratic Party had also received, it was due to the fact that the Social Democratic Party also had received the largest share of votes in the election. In percentage terms, the independent Social Democrats has most female deputies, with 3 of them in the parliamentary group. They made out 13.6% in their entire group. However, women had voted predominantly conservatively. The Center and German Nationalist Party benefited most from the new women's suffrage law. The main reason for this was probably the strong church ties of women. The church in particular was able to mobilize women much better than other institutions. Anita Augsburg, whom you see here in the middle of the slide, the well-known lawyer and pacifist and also living partner of leader Gustava Heimann, ran for a seat in the Bavarian parliament on behalf of the USPD, but was pushed to one of the back of the list by male candidates. Other women suffered the same fate as Augsburg. They could not prevail against the man on the list. As early in 1920, Hedwig Dransfeld, whom you see on the left, complained to that women on the electoral lists were treated like a representative body only. Men and women were not put in a direct relationship, but women were defined as a category among like region, profession, denomination, and associations. Men were simply the norm, women not. So women had little chance to make it high on the list because men sat on the party's ruling bodies. They also lacked the influence of financially strong lobbying and of professional organizations and the industry. From the beginning, women in the parties fought for better consideration in the nomination of the candidates and, with the exception of the Social Democrats, joined together in women's committees within their parties to achieve their goals. In the social democracy, there was a different system for women's representation. However, the appointment to the committees that decided who would run for office were almost exclusively male. Nevertheless, as early as 1920, women in the Catholic Center Party achieved a resolution on an optional quota for women, according to which a constituency in which 5 candidates had previously been elected, 1 woman was to be placed in 2nd place, but at least in 3rd place in the next election. This was obviously not observed for the Reichstag, but it was observed in most constituencies for the Prussian Landtag, resulting in a relatively high quota of women in the Center Party. Women in the Center Party also threatened an electoral strike. Let me close this. I'm sorry for a moment. This is really disturbing. So here we go again. From the beginning, women in the parties, here I have been already. In the end, this resulted in an organizational structure of the parties according to gender. This development had highly ambivalent consequences for the future. On one hand, a recognized representation structure of women was established in all the way in German parties. This was a remarkable progress and gain compared to the years of 1908 to 1918. On the other hand, this structure reinforced the ghettoization of female members and thus their permanent special role in Parliament. So I'm coming to my third point. What topics did women work on in Parliament, and how did these women rule? What exactly has changed now that women sat in the Reichstag? Outwardly, they tried to be less conspicuous. There was an agreement that women should not wear hats, as was otherwise customary in public. As you see here in the middle, Clara Zetkin, who's in the middle on the picture on the left side, is wearing a hat. And they chose discrete black, white, and gray combinations for the clothing. The thing of female parliamentarians, including a great many female teachers, were also addressed as Frau and Fräulein, meaning Miss and Mrs., not Mrs., as would have been the customary if they were not married. And what happened in terms of content? That we already can observe from day one, women participated in parliament. In the Prussian parliament, Karl Herold of the Center Party greeted the first women parliamentarians. I'm going to cite in a second. He expressed that he was very pleased that among the numerous new forces were especially women who are called for the first time to participate in the shaping of our legislation. Just as it is through the mutually complementary activity of men and women that the welfare of the family is most promoted, so also the participation of women who have experience and knowledge in so many areas to show it in a special way will only successfully influence our deliberations and resolutions, quote end. Herold compared the activities of women parliamentarians with the maternal tasks in the family and suggested to them corresponding fields of activities in politics. Like that, he met the needs of female parliamentarians who wanted to legislate in parliament on issues that they had previously tried to push through their women's associations or other institutions. The social, the moral, the education of girls and women were the central contents of the women's political party work. In the Social Democratic Party, the majority of women members were involved in the Arbeiterwohlfahrt, the worker welfare. The same pattern we can find among the Catholic centrists. The liberal and conservatives did not have their own welfare associations, but here too, social issues were an important field of work for female deputies, such as youth care or occupational issues for female labor, especially in home economics. In addition, there were peace conditions, equal rights, and for women, social and health policies, and schooling and continuing education that I already mentioned. Foreign policy, the military, certain economic issues, and other topics were, on the other hand, reserved for men. In the National Assembly, female deputies gave 28% of their speeches on social policy issues. Only 4% of men spoke on them as well. One of the problems that arose was the male deputies stayed away from the purely women's debates because they considered social issues negotiated by women to be apolitical, with the result that the parliament was often unable to vote in these issues. In percentage terms, women made fewer speeches in plenary than men. They were more interested in working in committees, where they had more seats in proportion to their share in parliamentary groups. Here too, female deputies tended to focus on socio-political and educational topics, or these were topics that they were trusted with and assigned to. Especially on such issues where women's right to self-determination and the protection of the family seemed incompatible, there were clear controversies between the female parliamentarians of different fractions, especially between the Social Democrats and the Center Party, as well as the national parties. The ideologies and the differences they caused were huge. Again and again, women parliamentarians also faced the conflict of whether to vote for their party or for their gender. Some female parliamentarians chose the less conflictual route of abstention in order to be re-nominated by their parties. On a few initiatives, there was nevertheless a female caucus that worked across party lines to bring about improvements by women coming together to push one issue through. Female politicians experienced contradictory demands in their roles. If they were considered professionally competent, they were praised for standing their ground and considered to be male. If they stood up for women's issues, on the other hand, they were considered to be feminine and apolitical. What was defined as political in what context and by whom was and is of central importance. In Parliament, it is important not only to place one's own issue, but also to interest, mobilize, and win over other groups. If the people and the issues are seen as political, the political work is more successful. Expanding this sphere to include new discourses and definitions of politics was and still is a challenge after the granting of women's suffrage over 100 years ago. But did women see these points? Did they ask themselves about the question of distribution of power in their ruling in the Weimar Republic? Most female parliamentarians did not see their mandate as a right that arose from their election. But for them, this mandate was only justified if they also represented the female characteristics. Thus, they worked extra, and especially extra in women's areas, to justify themselves in their new power roles. It is clear from this line of argument, which was espoused primarily by parliamentarians from the bourgeois parties, but also by the Social Democrats, that female parliamentarians, at least in the early years of the women's suffrage, were not asking the question of power. They wanted to supplement male politics, not to be equal, but to be treated on equal terms. Many failed to recognize the importance of the established structures, networks, and laws that continued to exist, and that it often took the withdrawal and pushback of male self-interest to push through women's interest. From the perspective of committed women in the 1920s, the structural problem was not yet a serious one, but it was nevertheless recognized. Many politicians and parliamentarians who had come from the ranks of the women's movement expressed great disappointment from 1920 forward on the limited reach of their voices and their concerns. Some also turned away from the parties in disappointment and proposed women's lists or the formation of a women's party as alternatives. Also, in absolute and relative terms, the number of women's deputies decreased since the first election and leveled off at around 7%. As the Republic progressed, especially in its dramatic final phase, women were even more pushed to the back, with the result that fewer and fewer women were represented in the leadership bodies. As a matter of principle, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi party, did not nominate women as candidates at all. In election campaigns, at political events, in publication and in plenary debates, women parliamentarians in particular warned against voting for the Nazi party and their renewed restriction of women's rights that would then inevitably follow. Even the last speeches of female parliamentarians of the Social Democrat and the Center Party before the transfer of power in January 1933 bear witness to the advocacy of democratic principles and international understanding, especially of the female parliamentarians. But women's warning did not prove to be decisive in the outcome of this election. The crisis of the Weimar Republic, as Kirsten Heinsohn has put it, also manifested itself as a rollback of gender democracy. So I'm coming to an end.
Marion, are we close to complete, because we have extended the 15 minutes by far?
I thought I had 20 minutes, and yeah, I'm coming to an end. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Coming to an end. The Weimar Republic, across party structural features of women's political participation in German parties, formed or was reiterated, which were not to be changed until the 1980s. Following general patterns were established. First, there was a very small number of female representatives in the leading party bodies. Second, all parties established an internal gender-specific organizational structure. And third, the policies of the few active and well-known party women were dominated by the so-called women's issues. This also explains why the perceived masculine character of politics was not only questioned, but repeatedly reaffirmed, despite the admission of women to the parties and to the right of vote. The attribution of gendered stereotypical characteristics to certain policy areas continued to reinforce the hierarchy of values between important masculine areas and less important feminine issues. These findings apply to all parties and groupings on the political spectrums from left to right. In the years before World War I and the Weimar Republic, a gender order of party politics thus emerged that has far-reaching consequences until today. But the forced parliamentarians nevertheless achieved a great deal. They advocated social reforms and played a decisive role in shaping today's welfare state. They also campaigned for better education for girls and women, women's rights, and much more. They debated gender orders and social reform in parliament. They sought compromises in male comrades in arms for their causes. They stood up for women's action and public speaking in politics. Women parliamentarians worked to create a more gender equal democracy in which women were represented, albeit still in small degree in all three branches of the government. Formal civic equality for men and women had been achieved, and with it, the legal exclusion of women from politics. They now made public speeches in the important political arena in the parliament. This also had a self-empowering effect on women. So what about today? In Germany, we have in this parliament 34.1% of women. Within the parties, there are significant differences in the distribution. In case of the Green Party and the Left Party, half of the members of the parliament of their fractions are female. There are few women in the CSU and in the AfD, the right parties. In the Christian Democratic Party and the Social Democrats, the proportion varies. The parliamentary quota is still debated. Two courts have surprisingly declared it now unconstitutional in the two countries of Germany it was introduced. Worldwide, the situation is no better. Still, only about 1 of 4 parliamentarians worldwide is a woman, fewer than 1 in 5 government ministers is a female, and the number of female heads of the state or governments are also still low. So there's still only partial parity to speak of worldwide. And still, women in politics make a difference. So what has changed in effect since 1918? There are more women, but do these women in positions to rule nowadays still face similar problems, or do they have different ones? That remains to discuss for us now. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking over my time. I really thought I had 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. We will proceed now to the next paper by Dr. Zafiris Nikitas from the Department of Theatre Studies of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, who will be speaking on Trials on Stage, the German documentary theatre on the 1960s.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity of participating in this seminal symposium. I would like to thank the organizers and also Professor Papakonstantinou for letting me know about this specific conjunction of interdisciplinary studies on law and also arts and culture. So I will start with my presentation, and later on I will showcase a series of illustrations on the performances that I will speak about, so that I can comment without interrupting the flow of the presentation. So the title of the presentation is Trials on Stage, the German Documentary Theatre of the 1960s. In the 1960s, a series of German playwrights constructed dramatic trials that brought on stage court disputes on Nazi crimes. The two most important trials that inspired such plays were the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem and the subsequent Frankfurt Auschwitz trials from 1963 to 1965 in Germany, while various trials in America were also used as a reference point. More specifically, Heiner Kipphard used the trial form along with documentary projections in his play The Hand of the Generals, as well as his play in the matter of Robert Oppenheimer in 1964 that drew from the Oppenheimer security hearing in 1954. Also, another playwright, Martin Walser, based his play The Black Swan that was published in 1964 on authentic letters of the public prosecutor in Frankfurt. Also, Rolf Schneider presented the trial of Richard Waverly and drew from the trial of the Hiroshima pilot Claude Laidley in Texas in 1961. And of course, Peter Weiss based his infamous play, The Investigation, in 1965 on documents from the Frankfurt trials. So these radical plays transformed the theater stage into a judicial space that revisited the selected trials and produced a public discourse on the administration of justice and its consequences in the social milieu. The live television reporting of these events reinforced the desire of German playwrights to construct a kind of judicial theater of tribunals that tackled two major aspects: the crimes of the Second World War in connection to America, and also the crimes related to Hitler that the German society had to face through the complex process of Vergangenheitsbewältigung. In the presentation at hand, I will look into the cultural and judicial discourse on jurisdiction and public perception in a decade that turned the German stage into a radical space of poetic and dramatic justice in an overlapping with the German and American court systems. Starting with the first play, The Matter of Robert Oppenheimer in 1964, Kipphard explored with rigorous questionings the case of Oppenheimer, the physicist that contributed to the construction of the atomic bomb. The playwright made clear in his short introductory note, entitled The Play in Relation to Documentary Data, that the chief source were the records, 3,000 typewritten pages of the proceedings that were published by the United States Atomic Energy Commission 10 years earlier in 1954. Turning to Hegel's aesthetic, Kipphard underlined that his aim was to present the core and the significance of a historical event and strip away the circumstances. In this context, he chose to represent, for example, the 40 witnesses of the original hearing by choosing only 6, and also chose to intervene with poetic liberty in the text. The play was directed by Erwin Piscator, an expert on political theater from the 1930s, at the Freie Volksbühne in Berlin in 1964. The setting resembled a courtroom with 3 security boards sitting next to each other, resembling judges that examined the case. The various projections, such as the shadows of people killed in Hiroshima, were visible in the space over the acting area. The tight construction of the space created a sense of an overpowering control on Oppenheimer. The same year, Jean Vilar directed also the play at the theater he used in Paris, choosing a more loose construction of the space. Oppenheimer was questioned on the level that was lower than the one with the security board, underlining through this height choice the power play of justice. In his play, Kipphard described the space as a small, ugly arena. Besides the board and Oppenheimer, the play included 4 councils and also the ones that represented the Atomic Energy Company. The witnesses included physicists and security officers. The play presented a complex judicial process that focused on the political and ethical motives of Oppenheimer concerning the atomic bomb. A recording of McCarthy's voice in the first act made clear that the inquiry related to the possible anti-patriotic communistic sentiments that may have lurked into the USA, as well as Oppenheimer's way of thinking. During the first act, Oppenheimer is questioned extensively on his personal relationship with communist ideas and the relevant political ties of his surroundings. The physicist calls himself with the term fellow traveler in relation to communism and describes such a traveler as a person who agrees with certain parts of the communist program, and he is willing to cooperate with communists without himself belonging to the party. When he reaches the conclusion on his statement, Oppenheimer claims that he was not communist, but also admits his ties with this political agenda. The epicenter of the play is an attempt to clarify whether Oppenheimer's distancing from the catastrophic use of the atomic bomb related to possible communist ideas and constituted treason, or whether it sprang out of his moral standings. The final decision clarifies that it is the second. Although we consider Dr. Oppenheimer's numerous communist associations in the past a grave indictment, as a character states, we find no indication of disloyalty. The latest statement also clarifies the stance of Oppenheimer. This is a fictive account used by Kipfer that goes beyond the documents of the judicial proceedings. In a short manifesto, Oppenheimer talks on the diversion of science from its ethical grounds during the Cold War era. He underlines, when I think what might have become of the ideas of Copernicus or the discoveries of Newton under present day conditions, I begin to wonder whether we were not perhaps traitors. Bertolt Brecht had already touched on the subject with his own Life of Galileo before the war, while German-speaking playwrights such as Friedrich Dürrenmatt explored the grotesque threat of the nuclear destruction with plays such as The Physicists during the same era. The threat loomed over Europe in the post-war era like the sword of Damocles. In the investigation, the next play, Peter Weiss moves in 1965 even closer to the simulation of a trial on the theater stage. Weiss focuses on the Frankfurt trials, bringing on stage the description of abhorrent crimes of the Nazis in the concentration camp in Auschwitz. The characters include a judge, a prosecuting attorney, a counsel for defense, 9 witnesses, and 18 accused Nazis. The 11 scenes of the play move from the arrival of Jewish people at the camp to their demise in the fire ovens. Although the connection with the trial is obvious, Weiss underlines in a short note that the director should abstain from the precise reconstruction of the trial. As he pointed out in the presentation of the play, no attempt should be made to reconstruct the courtroom before which the proceedings of the camp took place. He continues, any such reconstruction would be impossible as trying to represent the camp itself on stage. Weiss naturally echoed Adorno's dictum that there can be no poetry after Auschwitz. During the play, the witnesses detail the experiences in the concentration camps and the condition they faced. The role of the judge is outlined clearly as he asks short and precise questions. His aim is to clarify details with the most objective manner possible, avoiding at all costs to take sides. The prosecuting attorney and the counsel for defense intervene to clarify further details related to the actions of the accused and the witnesses through short questions as well. On the other hand, the accused, as well as the witnesses, speak longer and expose the details of the concentration camp. The words of the witnesses, who remain unnamed, although austere, bring into perspective the atrocious crimes which are described during their stay and during their marching towards death and the crematorium. As a witness points out, the people went through the gate slowly and wearily, children hung on their mother's skirts, old men carried babies or pushed baby carriages moving towards their death and the crematorium. On the other hand, the accusers try to find excuses and justify their actions based on the duty and the law that concern their own actions. The stance of the accused in Weiss' plays reflects what Hannah Arendt named the banality of the evil in her book Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil in 1963, where she reported on the trial of Adolf Eichmann. In her book, she underlined that the specific accused Nazi pointed out that he was just doing his duty and he did nothing more than what the law decided before his own personal decisions. In 1965, another play that concerned the specific trials was written and published by Martin Walser in his play The Black Swan. The play took a different approach from the one employed by Weiss, turning to fiction, not only facts. Walser focused on a son of an ex-doctor at the concentration camp who tries to come in terms with the past and his father, using elements from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Here, the trial takes place more within the psyche of the main character than the public discourse. It is characteristic that the play does not take place in a courtroom, but in a psychiatric ward. The inspiration for the play came from a real life event, a professor that took place in the crimes at the Auschwitz camp. Towards conclusion on such plays of documentary theater, it's important to point out that they are based on official documents and court transcripts, legal records, and evidence presented at court. This documentary theater brings together two seemingly opposing forces, the state archives and theater performance. The tensions between archives, law, and performance have been a central focus for the field of performance studies since its inception. Diana Taylor influentially distinguishes between the archive that includes documents and artifacts and the repetition and the repertoire, the ephemeral performances of embodied memory. Seen in this way, these kind of archives are used in order to write history over and against the lived experience of marginalized people. Rebecca Snyder, in performing Ruins, argues that the story of the archive begins with the house of the Greek archon, the head of the state, and eventually becomes the arm of the judicial empire that uses documents to disable local knowledge and to support a mode of governance against memory. The documents of civilization contained in an archive are, in Benjamin's famous formulation, also documents of barbarism. Now, let me share the document on the specific photographs on the performances. So this is the performance in the matter of Robert Oppenheimer. This is first photograph is from the directing of Jean Villard in Paris. As you can see, the space is opened up and Oppenheimer is in a lower level. In a way, all the
I'm
judges
sorry,
and the
Nikitas.
question.
I have to do it. Oh, no, no. I think you have to start the presentation because we only see the first screen.
Okay.
And may I remind you also that time is closing to the end.
Yes. So you cannot see the second or the third?
We only see them
No,
in very
just the first.
small. You have to push on the presentation button to start the presentation.
You mean on the PowerPoint or
Yes,
through
the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint.
Through the PowerPoint, once it's shared, yes, it's working now.
So now do you see it?
Screen, but we're on the second slide.
Okay. Now do you see on the third one?
We see the one saying in the matter of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Okay.
With the picture.
If you can push the second button on the top of your screen, από τρέχουσα διαφάνεια, it should start switching. Yeah, this one.
Well, now I see that it's not changing.
No, it's not. We're on the third slide. When you push the button upstairs, does not change anything?
No, I changed it in my computer, but not in, it doesn't change there. So I'll try once more just to, from the Zoom, and then maybe. And now I think you can see it.
Yes, we are in slide 8, the investigation.
Yes, exactly. So this is the first is the directing by Jean Villard in Paris, and you can see the reconstruction of a space that resembles a court. Then this is the reconstruction by a political director, Erwin Piscator, which resembles even more a court. And then we move to the investigation, which is clearly the reconstruction of a court. And this is also directed in Russia in the 1960s. Also the investigation, you can see how the court is used with two basic spaces, and the use of projections high on the ceiling. And this is the creation of a classic example of creation of a judicial reconstruction in theater in the 1960s. And finally, this is the Black Swan, where you can see the use of a psychiatric ward. So thank you so much for presentation.
Thank you. And now we pass to the next paper by Professor Dr. Jasna Bachovska Nediḳ of the Cyril and Methodius University, the Faculty of Law of Justinianus Primus, and Assistant Professor Dr. Ognen Vangelov of the American College of Skopje on the influence of legal culture on authoritarian rule in post-socialist countries, with an emphasis on the Republic of North Macedonia.
Thank you for introduction. But just a moment, I have to check for sharing my presentation. My simple, very short presentation, because this is the last second. I will be very short, I promise. Okay. First of all, I want to congratulate you for the conference. Especially for the topic or the title of this conference, and good organization, primarily for the timely notification of all stages in the process of preparing this event. Also, thank you for the opportunity to present our paper online. I'm especially glad that we are writing this paper together with my colleague, Professor Ognen Vangelov, who work on the problem of competitive authoritarianism in a post-socialistic country as a part of his doctoral dissertation at Queen's University in Canada. Our paper is entitled The Influence of the Legal Culture of Authoritarian Rule in Post-Socialist Country, with an emphasis of the Republic of North Macedonia. Unfortunately, he cannot present today, but he will give his input in our final paper. Maybe the topic of our paper is not directly related to the narrow idea of the conference. It signaled the importance of a certain factor of the social environment, in this case, the level of legal culture for maintaining the types of governments and person in power. In that direction, I thank you for positively selecting the idea of the paper, our paper. Now I will stick the general idea of the paper, and the argument and data will be in the final paper. paper. First of all, I will address legal culture for those who don't deal with the sociology of law. Legal culture is a classic concept of the sociology of law, and the first appeared in the American sociological jurisprudence by Friedman, who is the acknowledged father of the term on legal culture and who defines the legal culture as a life of the legal system. This concept has been reactualized as important for the countries seeking to modernize their political and legal system, such as the Republic of North Macedonia. In social theory, legal culture is a current concept in comparative law, hence the importance of comparative research of European national legal culture. Within the EU are countries with different legal systems that are based on different legal cultural values and tradition, and at the same time are connected by common institutional and political framework and economic mechanism. The issue of the relationship between national legal culture and the need to conduct a European legal policy is becoming more and more important. Regarding the definition, legal culture is broadly defined as the attitudes and beliefs of ordinary people towards the rule of law, the readiness to respect the laws and thereby influence the functioning of legal institutions positively or negatively. This broad definition has been criticized as a fluid, but legal culture is defined much more specifically by David Nediḳ in 1997, providing identifying elements that enable measurability primarily of internal legal culture. In my next slide, I'm going to explain the difference between internal and external. In that direction, David Nediḳ says that the legal culture is the way judges are appointed and controlled, the status and dignity of lawyers, example, the different position of the judge and the lawyer in the United States of America and Europe, that then different behaviors that are expressed by the rate of trials or imprisonment. But he also includes in the term legal culture the more fluid aspect like ideas, values, aspiration, and mentalities. The acknowledged father of the term, Friedman, distinguished between internal and external legal culture. Other theorists also accept this division. The internal legal culture is the attitudes and practice of legal professionals of law or law practitioners, lawyers, judges, prosecutors, notarians, executors, and the external legal culture expressed through the opinions, interests, and pressures that citizens have on the law. James Caldeira Gibson and Gregory Caldeira, pioneering study from 1996, Legal Culture of Europe, based on the survey of attitudes and beliefs of citizens in the EU member states, conducted in 1993, examines the external legal culture of the then 12 member states of the European Union. The result of the study showed two totally different tendencies. In some countries, the support of the rule of law is very low at the expense of individual freedom, while in other countries, the support for rule of law is relatively strong, and because of that, the alienation from the law is very low. Although the external and internal legal culture are different, they are independent and cannot be permanently in conflict. They are interdependent The internal legal culture should be the generator of the external legal culture, and the external legal culture should exert the pressure to the request to the system, such request for efficiency, quick justice, availability, or legal remedies. In our paper, case study for legal culture will be our country, Republic of North Macedonia. And in that direction, one of the key problems in post-communistic countries backsliding to authoritarian rule of law is the collapse of already weak rule of law. Our paper will present data for the level of legal culture during the rule of the right-wing Weimar DPMNE under the leadership of Nikola Gruevski. The legal culture especially is important for the Republic of North Macedonia because we have no problem with term of right and or valid positive law, which was demonstrated by obtaining the candidate status in 2005, but how that rights lives, how it's applied, protection of human rights, citizen trust in the judicial system, and the efficiency of the judiciary are problematic processes. Also, the legal culture is especially important for the Republic of North Macedonia because the lawyer's image is destroyed. The justice system faced a complete collapse. For example, we are a state where special public prosecutors was established, which was founded with the support of the international community, above all the EU institutions, at the moment when citizen trust in the public prosecutor was less than 2%. And now special public prosecutor is in prison. It is indicative that during this period, there is almost no academic research on the situation of the judiciary and prosecution, or only monitoring by non-governmental organization and the report of the European Commission. After the great political crisis in the Republic of Macedonia, which escalated after the publication of wire-taped conversation, an expert group was formed, which, among other things, qualitatively investigate the situation in judiciary. The conclusion of the expert group are follows. There is an atmosphere of pressure and mistrust in judiciary. The advancement of judge is linked to the political establishment. Employment in the judicial service is also politically dependent. Existence of the political dimension in the appointment of the prosecutor by the fact that they are elected in the parliament. Judges' dismissal or resignation usually followed controversial decision in high-profile case. Manipulation of the system for appointing judge without control of judicial council who should perform that control. Also, only 10 verdicts out of the 100 cases of the European Court for Human Rights have been executed. After this assessment, people in the judiciary did not have any reaction at the level of association, professionals, which showed that the system at the cultural level and at the level of social responsibility is totally inactive. And for the end, some common recommendation. Just a moment. The judiciary should be the main generator of legal culture, as a bastion of the legal elite. To this end, we should work on the integrity of the justice system by fighting corruption and nepotism in this segment. Furthermore, the judiciary should be transparent and develop strategic communication with the public. These two elements, transparency and strategic communication, have a great role in raising legal awareness. Here in the Republic of North Macedonia, these two segments are seen as something unimportant, which is further cost the system. The non-governmental sector in the field of justice in the Republic of North Macedonia should also be active in terms of raising the level of legal culture through projects like legal advice, the free legal aid campaign for the social function of law. Also, legal culture along with political education and media literacy should be part of primary education through the dispersed approach. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And last but not least for today, we have Professor Dr. Daniela Blazhevska, I hope I say it correctly, from the St. Cyril and Methodius University, again, the Faculty of Law, Justinianus Primus, who will be speaking about unfit rule, public speaking skills of the candidate. Thank you.
Good leaders are good speakers. Good speakers are not necessarily good leaders. When we use the term good leaders, we do not think of efficient leaders or persons who could seduce masses, but rather of persons who had ideas and moved the world forward. Change always starts with one person who has a mission, who has faith in the goal which gives them strength to work on its achievement, even if the rest of the world cannot see it. A leader should serve as an example for other people, not because of what he says, but because of what he does, according to Colin Powell. According to him, people follow a good leader, trust him, he has competency, character, courage, moral, physical, mental, spiritual, loyalty, confidence, selflessness, dedication, and empathy. Great leaders are almost always great simplifiers who can cut through argument, debate, and doubt to offer a solution everybody can understand, in the words of Michael Korda. In the context of political public speaking, Obrat Stanojević and Sima Avramović give a good classification of leaders of people: ordinary leaders, true leaders, and charismatic persons. The ordinary leaders are presidents, kings, tsars who ruled throughout history. Those, according to them, could be wise and honest and brave. However, there was something missing for them to be true leaders. True leaders are distinguished from ordinary leaders by a couple of characteristics, such as special appearance, determination and power of persuasion, ability of simplified expression. According to Stanojević and Avramović, a charismatic leader should have a strong will and a gift for governing with the masses to captivate them with his appearance, words, and gestures. Leaders have ideas, values, and courage, manage in times of change, make things happen, create a scenario for success. They are revolutionary, draw examples from their past, and tell dynamic and motivating presentations. The importance of speaking for successful leadership is defined by the psychologist Howard Gardner in his book Leading Minds, with the knowledge that even at the age of 5, people understand the world through dramatic displays. Therefore, the leader who can develop or bring universal sensibility to classic plots is the one who most often succeeds in convincing the public of his or her program, policy, or plan. Leaders tell 3 types of stories: who I am, who we are, and future stories. That's according to Taichi. According to the research which I have conducted for my master thesis about the public speaking skills of the women politicians in the political campaign in the Republic of Macedonia in 2006, the name is because of the historical context in 2006, it can be concluded that some of them were ordinary leaders because they were presidents of the political parties. 2 of them during the campaign, 1 afterward, and all of them were first on the list of the candidates for the members of the parliament. The opinion of 5 women politicians leaders expressed in the in-depth interviews deserve to be heard. I will name them by name, not by political parties and everything, only that they are 5 women politicians from 5 different political parties, and the 2006 was like representative year for that because that was the year when the most of the women politicians were first on the lists, and 2 of them were presidents of the political parties during the campaign. One was elected afterwards, so that was interesting for me. Unfortunately, few female political figures have been developed, and unfortunately, our politician and political leadership is defined by a style that projects power and toughness. That is strictness, force, which is more of a masculine trait. Values that are closer to women are being promoted less. For example, gentleness, hardness, and emotionality. That is hard to do, and councillors get used to a male image for a politician, so female politicians are reduced, in fact, to a specific copy of a male political figure. I also hope that this will change in time, because we have more women in politics, said Radmila Šekerinska. Liljana Popovska, on the other hand, thinks that election campaigns are a natural environment for practicing political oratory on the part of men and are not very receptive to women. When you are speaking, the question is whether they will receive what you want. The question is whether they will be satisfied with what they are listening to, whether they will consider it for good enough. The same thing said in a peaceful atmosphere outside of the elections. They may like it tremendously. But in terms of hotness, I think that a gentle female voice, even with the best argumentation, does not work as convincingly as a strong male voice that will throw 2 or 3 slogans. I think that here, as women, we have a certain handicap in relation to our male colleagues, and that the meetings are more comfortable for them and the men are in a more natural environment than women, says Popovska. Comparing the behavior of women and men in politics, Vesna Janevska concludes, most women are much less militant, much less aggressive, much more reasonable, much more pragmatic or practical. Most women are less vain than men and are ready to be a victim. They are ready to firmly defend their position, even to argue, to convince. But if they judge that it is for their great good, they will withdraw. Unlike men who will persistently beat their head against the wall to confirm theirs is correct, even if it's harmful not only for the environment but also for them. It is important to show masculinity, pride, dignity. Silvana Boneva thinks that there are no differences between the rhetoric of men and women, but that depends on the personality of the speaker. I know many women who successfully lie and don't care if tomorrow they will return to the place where they promised something. I know many conscientious women who will suffer a lot if what they say is not fulfilled. That is a feature of a human's character, and we cannot divide it into men and women, says Boneva. Since the pre-election campaign in 2006, Janevska concluded that the type of leader preferred by the citizen has changed. I like in the past when they wanted to see greatness in front of them. They now want to see greatness in relation to trust, honesty, openness, and sincerity. I think that in the past they behaved more authoritarian towards party leaders, idealized them much more, and even ignored their negativity. In the parties, the story is the same, but more intensified. Šekerinska has the opposite opinion, which does not mean that she likes such a situation. We are still ruled by an authoritarian mentality, which requires separation. They will criticize you if you have a lot of bodyguards. They will criticize you if you are separate a lot, but somehow they will be afraid of you. I think that there should be a change in politics, in which citizens are afraid of their own politicians, even when they love them, even when they support them. The trend should be more European, modern, but everything takes time. We need to change, and the public should embrace.
Are also on the pic.
Said Radmila Šekerinska. People win or lose election based on their public speaking skills. The aim of the research is to analyze these skills as a criterion of fitness or unfitness to rule, as an instrument of selection for this acceptance or rejection of the potential ruler or elected person. The analysis of public speaking skills will be based on these elements: ability to speak, ability to hold a public speech, knowledge of the principle of public speaking, personal public speaking skills, public speaking experience, gender characteristics, used words, diction, and body language. I hope I will succeed to complete this article. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have some time for questions, including also from those following online. Yes, please.
I'd have a question to our first speaker, because she mentioned the turnout in the, I can't remember which year the election, but about 1920, of 83%, which is an astonishingly high turnout. It's hardly paralleled in modern elections. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear some comment on that figure. And was it from a reduced electorate, for example, so that it was only, so I don't know what the suffrage rules were in Germany at that date. And so some situation of that very high figure would be interesting, I think.
Marion?
Yeah. Shall I answer right away, or are we collecting questions?
No, please go ahead.
Well, I think that the number was so high, especially because it was the first time that many Germans could vote. It was not only that women were the first time included, but also Prussia was at the same time stopping the three-class election system that they had before. That meant that also many male could vote first time on the same level as everybody. So it was a very special election in that sense. And then, of course, it was the first election as a democratic state that had never happened before. So you had like people also voting after the war, as I mentioned. And this election was like in the feeling of the people deciding about the future of Germany, basically. And that is why the turnout was so high. In fact, the turnout of women coming to the election was higher than with that of men by 0.5%. I mean, it was in general very high, but women even turned out higher. But I think it is a very exceptional situation and also didn't repeat itself like that in the Weimar Republic. It was because the war was over. It was the first democratic election in general. It was the first time that women could vote, and was the first time that many male could vote on the same level as like men of higher income classes before.
And so could I ask, was this a universal suffrage, everyone over the age of 21 or something like this?
It was for men over 18, I believe. I'm not exactly sure. And for women over 21. Later, they were like trying to cut the age of women to 25, but that was defeated. But I'm not sure about the men. Very welcome.
I have two questions. One is also for Marion. Since you gave us essentially a picture of women entering the parliament, but not making much of a difference due to an existing party system that was created by men previously and that continued to operate on its previous rules. Do you think there is some party or maybe some period in which a noticeable change can be found? So is there some party or some event that made the overall party organization more susceptible to those so-called women's issues, social issues, and so on? And maybe I should just ask my second question right away. The second one is for Daniela. You mentioned the importance of the candidate's public speaking skills, and what I think we all witness all over the world is that sometimes those public speaking skills seem to be more important to the voters than, say, the party program. I haven't heard a single politician here mention their party program recently. I think most voters don't know what's in the programs of their parties. So how would you comment on that? Is there any trend that you found in your research or something along the lines?
So Marion, thank you. First, for the first question, yes.
Okay, so I answer or Daniela first?
Marion, thank you.
Okay. I think the basic problem was, like I mentioned, that the party structure included women in a way that they recognized them in a way, but put them like in segregated parts, like special topics and also in a kind of, they idealized them in a way also that women, for example, because there were so many, they sat like in many of the commissions, but they were always taken as like the special part, not as the normal part. So we have a treatment of women that is on the same time respectful because they were women, but at the same time not taking them serious. A little bit like we see it also in women in the academia, you know, making the women single issues that you don't have to take them as a normal case, but make them like in icons. So you don't have to take them serious, but always can say it's an exception. It's another way of making or excluding women. You see that also like in, let's say like Frida Kahlo being like from here, from Mexico, or in Marie Curie. So the women were always like overhyped in their functions in order to make them like being beyond not having women to exclude as a general thing. And that also happened a little bit with the parliamentarians, besides the aspects that I addressed. But that the party system changed in general because of women, it did not happen in the Weimar Republic. It happened more after '83 when the Green Party came into the German parliament, and with them the first party that included women by force. They have a female quota. And with that, as I also mentioned, it was the first time again after decades that Germany had the same height of female parliamentarians that they had in 1919. And with the left party, it also happened. Since '83, I would say there's a change in the party system in Germany, but it's also going slow and has still its problems.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela.
It's very interesting question. That's somehow it's a result of what is happening these days. There is one famous research of Albert Mehrabian that the effect of the speech only 7% is made by the words, 38% by the voice, and it changes like diction and melody, intonation, tempo, etc. And 55% depends on body language. So if I can speak about today's political campaigns, I can say that it's true that we have moving from the speech in the past to the sentence or sentences, and now we're moved to words. So they're using just few words, and they are focused on TV visualizations, and it's all edited. So they are focused on the effect, multimedia skills, I can say. And sometimes we do not see the candidates and do not see the program or programs. Only we see the image of something, like images, presentations, which we cannot see whether they're true. And for example, we had, in our country, we have examples after each political campaigns when people are saying one thing, and when the elections are over, we have the reaction that they switch to something else. They're just promoting programs which never been introduced before in the political campaign. So I think if I can express my personal opinion, we must start from words and from the program, and that should be like, say, future speech for the future. If you don't have speech, if you don't have words, you cannot just using your gestures, right? You cannot manipulate with the intonation, with the words, and that's why we should conclude that in the beginning, what was the word or the logos, right?
Thank you.
Is there any other question online or in the room? If not, we'll thank again all the speakers.
Can I?
Ah, sorry.
This here is written you, the user, but here is Professor Dragica Vujadinović. I'm sorry for this weird title of mine. So hello to everyone, and I would like to put the question, or just to share with our dear friend and colleague Marion. Comparison between the proportion of women included into the parliament in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century and nowadays, and generally speaking. So the matter of numbers of women is important, but what we can see, what we can witness here in Serbia or in the former Yugoslavia, even when women take part in the politics and in the parliamentary decision-making, most often they do not make any change, any difference. They follow the male-dominated discourse, mindset, political ideas of their party leaders, who mostly are, most often are men. So the point of what do female politicians and parliamentarians really contribute, and what would and should they? Because that's not only a matter of numbers, but a matter of different approach to politics, which either includes gender equality perspective or not, which either includes different approaches which are closer to female sensitivity for solidarity, community, deliberation, etc., persuasion instead of conflict making, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you,
Marion, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would like to comment. First of all, it is something that I also observe in nowadays politics, and I believe that is maybe a change that we are experiencing in general in politics. Because I'm researching the female politicians in Weimar Republic much better than I'm knowing the ones nowadays. As a historian, sometimes you're more at home in the past than in the present. I can say for them that I don't have the feeling, I mean, of course, the personal ego always plays a role, but I do have the feeling that they really wanted to reach something in terms of goals for women. And that is a difference that I see for two politicians nowadays, whom I believe they seldom act for not selfish reasons. And then to come to the point that you have addressed before in the beginning, I think with the female parliamentarians in the Weimar Republic, you see, I have mentioned that also, that they were like drawn in between the party politics that they followed in many cases, in many instances, and their general fight for women's equal rights. And here you also see it very much that it depended on the personality of each of the women. They were the ones that were more opportunistic and then usually voted for the party politics. And then you see women, exceptional women in all party fractions, even on the right side, that did split away from the opinion of their factions and voted for women's rights. So you can see everything also in the Weimar Republic, even though I feel that the women were like stronger personalities altogether, and also in general much more oriented into reaching their goals than just pleasing their ego.
Thank you. Any other question or comment? If not, let's thank again our speakers, and this concludes today's words. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone, once again. So this is it for the online participants. Those who are here in person have dinner. We'll arrange that now. It's the same link for tomorrow, so everyone who's following online, we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow and the day after as well. Thank you once again, and goodbye.
Goodbye. It was great to see you all. Bye.
Znači, u 6:30 ga očekujemo, tako? Jel me čujete?
Možda? To je to za danas.